Welcome to Booked, where two guys tell you about the books they're reading. I'm Rob Olson.
And I'm Livius Nedden. I'm back.
You're back.
I'm back. So, just to address any concerns that anyone might have, Rob and I were on a break. We weren't on a break. I was on vacation, and then Rob and Misty had the opportunity to do a nonfiction review, which I'm sure all you guys heard, and then a subsequent interview, which I'm sure all of you guys heard. And now, at least, I think we're back to business as usual. Like, we plotted out our next few episodes, and that's it.
Yeah.
There's really nothing else to say. I just kind of wanted to address, because Rob pointed out it's been a month since we've done this. So it's good to be back. Rob, thank you for holding down the fort in my absence, and thank you, Misty, in the event that you're listening, for being a fairly adequate replacement, I would say.
Wow. Yeah, and I'm assuming that neither of us are going to have any vacations coming up in the near future. I know that, like, I just chose to cash out like 2 weeks of vacation time because, like, where the fuck am I going to go? So, but then I took a week vacation recently, but I just sat around at home, and it was so disappointing. I was like, yeah, I'm going to wait a while before I decide to do something with time away from work.
It's tough, right? I still have 2.5 weeks of vacation to take by the end of the year. So
yeah.
Not going anywhere, but yeah, I'm going to hopefully catch up on some stuff. Like projects around the house and shit like that is the plan for those. But yeah, it is disappointing when there's not a lot of cool stuff to do when you're off. So maybe I'll read an extra book that week.
Huh.
I didn't read a book the entire time. So whatever the last book we read was, like months and months ago, it feels like, is the last book I read up until this week and this week's book.
Wow, that Pastorella book is the last one. The Pastorella.
Oh God, that
Michael
was
Wilson. Yeah.
Holy shit, that makes it seem like even longer ago. I guess we did have our Halloween episode in between. Yeah, so yeah, that's the last book I read prior to Ink, which is this week's review. So here's I was going to say a little bit about Jonathan Maberry, but I don't think a little bit is the right term. He is a New York Times best-selling suspense novelist, 5-time Bram Stoker Award winner, and comic book writer. His vampire apocalypse book series V-Wars is being produced as a Netflix original series. His other works include the Joe Ledger thrillers Glimpse, the Rotten Ruin series, the Dead of Night series, The Wolfman, X-Files Origins, Devil's Advocate, and many others. His young adult space travel novel Mars One is in development for film, and his novel Glimpse and the V-Wars shared world vampire apocalypse series are being developed for TV, as is his best-selling Joe Ledger thriller series. I want you guys to know I'm about a third of the way into this right now. He is the editor of many anthologies, including The X-Files Aliens, Bug Hunt, Nights of the Living Dead, co-edited with zombie genre creator George A. Romero. His comics include Captain America, the Bram Stoker Award-winning Bad Blood, Black Panther, Punisher, Marvel Zombies Return, and more. His Rotten Ruin novels were included in the 10 best horror novels for young adults. His first novel, Ghost Road Blues, was named one of the 25 best horror novels of the new millennium. A board game version of V-Wars, A Game of Blood and Betrayal, was based on his novels and comics. He was a featured expert on the History Channel's Zombies, A Living History, and True Monsters. He is 1/3 of the very popular and mildly weird Three Guys with Beards podcast. He is a board member of the Horror Writers Association and the president of the International Association of Media Tie-In Writers. Jonathan lives in Del Mar, California, with his wife, Sarah Jo.
Before you make your commentary, I want you to know that I cut stuff out of this bio.
Yeah, seriously?
I did.
I was going to say, lots of things have changed since I started reading that bio. For example, since I started reading that bio, V-Wars was already a show on Netflix that I watched. So I know that's changed since we started this bio. But yeah, that's a long one. But thank you for editing, I guess.
Yeah, I did cut that down. Oh, man. This guy's got a lot of stuff under his belt, for sure.
Did you see V-Wars?
I did not.
It's not bad. Little 10-episode Netflix series. This guy had to be mid this year, so it's been out for a while.
Oh, maybe I'll check it out.
Yep.
All right, here is the synopsis for Ink, which is the book that we're going to be talking about. From New York Times bestselling author Jonathan Maberry comes a standalone supernatural thriller, Ink, about a memory thief who feeds on the most precious of dreams. Tattoo artist Patty Cakes has her dead daughter's face tattooed on the back of her hand. Day by day, it begins to fade, taking with it all of Patty's memories of her daughter. All she's left with is a certain knowledge that she has forgotten her lost child. The awareness of that loss is tearing her apart. Monk Addison is a private investigator whose skin is covered with the tattooed faces of murder victims. He is a predator who hunts for killers, and the ghosts of all those dead people haunt his life. Some of those faces have begun to fade too, destroying the very souls of the dead. All through the town of Pine Deep, people are having their most precious memories stolen. The monster seems to target the lonely, the disenfranchised, the people who need memories to anchor them to this world. Something is out there. Something cruel and evil is feeding on the memories, erasing them from the hearts and minds of people like Patty and Monk and others. Ink is the story of a few lonely, damaged people hunting for a memory thief. When all you have are memories, there's no greater horror than forgetting.
Synopsis fairly solid, I think, right?
Yeah, a little bit exaggerated, but otherwise,
Yeah,
it hits the right points.
I'm going to take a little bit of issue with the synopsis as well. So I did read this, and although I should have caught the names, I didn't necessarily from the synopsis. So Patty Cakes and Monk Addison were both characters in Glimpse, which was the last Jonathan Maberry book that we reviewed 2 years ago now, probably 2 years ago.
Yep.
The fact that it's billed as a standalone supernatural thriller, and we'll probably talk about this maybe over in spoiler talk more than here, but I'm calling that into question, and we'll get into that a little bit, but I wanted to address it since it's part of the synopsis.
Yeah, there's I will say that there is definitely crossover to other stuff that Mayberry has written, to the point where even Joe Ledger was mentioned at one point in the book.
Yeah, yes, he was. Not he does not make an appearance for the other Joe Ledger fans out there. I count myself among that group, at least in the early Joe Ledger books. I haven't read any of the more recent ones, assuming there are more recent ones. I read the first 3 or 4, and yes, so Joe Ledger does not actually make an appearance. But characters from the Pine Deep trilogy do, and this is mentioned, Ghost Road Blues is mentioned in the bio. That's part of the Pine Deep trilogy. And I'll give him credit here because that was written between, looks like 2006 and 2008. So a nice throwback for fans of that who, 12 years later can pick up In the Town of Pine Deep with. And I just kind of glanced at the synopses on where am I? Wikipedia. And I do see characters that we're going to talk about mentioned in the actual synopsis for the individual books in the Pine Deep trilogy. So kind of cool for fans of that. We'll see how well it played out, as much of it that showed up in this book for those of us that are not familiar with the Pine Deep trilogy.
Yeah. Now, before we dive into the story like we typically would, I'm going to preface that by saying that this book is in 3 parts, and the first part of the book does a lot of character introduction, and so we could probably spend 20 minutes just saying, and then this character does this, and then this character does this. But essentially the first third of the book is just introducing, the main cast of characters and establishing how they're linked into the greater story. So it's absolutely a very character introduction heavy first act, and then I feel like it really kind of hits a good momentum once we move into the second part of the book. But I mean, the first part's not super long. The parts are, it's the smallest part is the first one, and then the second one gets bigger, and the third one is by far the biggest.
So as Rob mentioned, 3 parts. I'm guessing he noticed because I know he read the paper version, so it's a little harder to notice in the ebook how long the parts are. Do you want to say it's 464 pages? which is a fairly long book. I don't feel like the book felt that long when I was reading it, but and I don't know, Rob, if you can confirm this or not, but I feel like this is the most chapters we've ever read in a book.
Oh yeah, I'm gonna go pick up the paper copy, so you're gonna hear me walk across the room.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I sent Rob a message. I don't remember. I think it said something like, I'm at 30% of the way into the book, and I'm on chapter 50.
All right, I'm back. Yeah, so 135 chapters total. And then actually the epilogue has its own chapters, so the epilogue has another 7, so over 140 chapters.
So if nothing else, I do want to say that that's a record. That has to be a record for this podcast. I can't imagine that it's not.
Yeah, it's got to be close if it's not, because the only thing I can think of is that Zoo by Patterson had a lot of chapters, but I don't think it was that many.
Let's see if we can find
I can verify that. Hang on.
That's right. You have copies of everything.
This digression is... Might as well write it out.
Yeah, no kidding.
All right, so I just grabbed my first edition hardcover of Zoo by James Patterson. Oh. It has 97 chapters and an epilogue. Nope, 98.
Not even close.
Not even
is
close.
What I call it. So, at any rate, I guess the point I'm trying to make it, and we'll talk about this. We talk about pacing. The one thing that I was going to say a lot of chapters do, but let's face it, that short chapters do is really move the pace of a story, right? So it can be used either to emphasize a point at the end of a chapter or to transition to another person's point of view. And this book is told from an omnipotent narrator, but it's got to be at least from a dozen characters' points of view throughout the course of the story. So there's a lot of perspective shifting on whose eyes we're looking through at any given time. One of the main ones, and I don't even know that I'm going to try to start from like page 1, but we'll say Monk Addison is the most likely protagonist. I feel, right? If you had to name one, it would be Monk. Does that feel right? Monk, who is a bounty hunter, not exactly like Boba Fett, more like, and I believe it comes up in the book, more like Dog the Bounty Hunter, where he's looking for people who have skipped bail. But he is hauling ass to Pine Deep because he is worried about his very close friend Patty Cakes. Both of these characters are from Glimpse. Patty is Vietnamese. She does tattoos, and we know from Glimpse, from what I remember, that both of them have some type of supernatural. I don't even know if background is the right word, but both of them have a little something going on that's not like the rest of us normal folks. So they have some kind of tie into the supernatural. So that's kind of where we get started. And those are two characters from Glimpse. Now the town they go to, or that Patty has moved to, and now Monk is coming to, is Pine Deep, which I mentioned. Is from the 3 books from the Pine Deep trilogy. The issue there is that some time ago, and I'm going to take a stab at 2006 to 2008, some bad shit went down there, and through the course of the book, a little bit more is revealed, and it starts to get weirder and weirder. Like it starts off as they call it the trouble, is the event that happened, but as you find out more about the trouble, it's weirder than you would think.
Before we move on, curiosity got the best of me because I remembered we were talking. I'm going back to the chapter count just really quick. I remembered that there were also what were called interludes, and so I wanted to see if those contributed to the chapter total. That they did not, but they were numbered. So there's 14 interludes plus the 135 normal chapters plus the 7 chapters in the epilogue. So total insanity.
When he updates his bio on Amazon, I guarantee you the Guinness book setter, Guinness World Record setter will also be in there.
The most chapters in a book. Yeah. So, and the Pine Deep stuff again. So this is going to be something where, I feel had we read the Pine Deep books, possibly the fact that they were heading into or set in Pine Deep would have meant something different to me, than just going into it, having not read those books and not knowing the significance of that or what the trouble was and all that stuff. But like I said before, in the beginning, we're establishing like what's going on with a bunch of characters. So in addition to Patty and Monk, some of the locals come up quite early on as well, and specifically a psychic whose name is Diana. And Diana had gone to Patty and gotten a tattoo, a very beautiful tattoo of roses and all this stuff on her arm. And so that's the link to Patty. But at the beginning of the book, something weird happens because Diana is, starting her day at the shop that she works at as a psychic, or what does she call herself? It's not psychic. It's
she's a sensitive.
Sensitive, yeah. Mm-hmm. Which is psychic for psychic. And she gets all set up and I'm going to take it back a little bit. She does a little like a card sort kind of thing or whatever. And
tarot card reading. Yep.
Yeah, one of those just for herself, just to like kind of like it seemed like it was just like a let's see how the day is going to be kind of thing. And so she does this for herself, pulls out 3 cards, and it's like the 3 like worst possible cards you could have together, and it basically foretold like doom for the town or whatever. And so she's like, well, that's not good. And then she starts her work, gets set up, gets ready to go, and then kind of loses time and ends up talking to her boss, who I think's name is Olivia. And Olivia's like, hey, are you ready for your next customer? And Diana's like, what do you mean next customer? I just started. Shouldn't it be this person? And they're like, no, he just left. So that's the first time we see something going on with a loss of time or a loss of memory. And then from there, I think, if my memory of the timeline is right, then a similar thing happens to Patty. Or they might be reversed, but they happen like very close to each other.
Correct. So I think because it comes up really early in the book, we can kind of address the antagonist by name, because there's no secret. There's not a mystery here on like who the bad guy is. So his name is Owen Minor. And I guess I'll say it here. I mean, this is, I guess all the clues are kind of in the synopsis. So he has an ability to touch somebody's tattoo and then take those memories from that person, which he can then relive. I wasn't really clear. I felt like it was only like a little bit, but then it seemed like later in the book it was indicative that he could relive those memories like over and over and over again. So really what it comes down to is if you have a shitty tribal symbol tattoo that you got because you were drunk with your college buddies, he would probably remember like, oh, you hanging out with your buddies or stuff like that. But a lot of people get tattoos that are very, very personal to them. And the issue with Patty is she had a daughter who some terrible, terrible things happened to when she was just a little girl, 10, I believe. Does that sound right? 9 or 10? She's
pretty young. Yeah.
And Patty does very, very hyper realistic tattoos. And she had a tattoo of her daughter on her wrist. And Owen takes that, and Patty starts to lose the memory of her daughter, which clearly is a pretty disturbing concept overall, and a new spin on that type of thing, at least for me. It's funny because when you were talking about Diana losing time, that took me back to Glimpse, because is it Dr. Nine? Is that his name in Glimpse? That's what he did.
Oh, yeah.
He stole time from people.
Yep.
So definitely from that same, like, Owen and Dr. Nine are probably like distant cousins, I'm thinking. Like a kind of similar thing that happens. So Monk, as he makes it into town finally, comes across Patty, who is in terrible, terrible shape after this happens, as you could well imagine.
Yeah. One thing I'll add, my observation about the tattoo theft or the memory theft thing is, like the more significant the memory, or like depending on the nature of the memory that's tied to the tattoo, either it's very consumable and it only lasts a short amount of time, or if if the, let's say that, you had a tattoo that, so like if Livius had a really meaningful butterfly tattoo on his lower back, just as an example, I'm not saying that Livius has a butterfly tattoo on his lower back, but if he did, and it had a very and it was tied to like the fact that like it was the Romanian flag, but like a butterfly, like that memory, like he would lose his understanding of like his his pride in his heritage. Like, so like there's the more significant, like you tie something to the tattoo, the more the bad guy gets out of it.
Yeah, and he's a sick fuck who really gets off on people's pain too. So you would think that I don't know, if you took a regular person and you'd say, oh, you know what, I stole this tattoo off this frat boy, and all I'm doing is reliving crazy drunken threesomes that he had. Like, you'd be like, all right, hey, that's kind of cool, right? But he goes a different direction. The more pain and loss that's involved in it, the more he gets off on it. Physically, by the way, I'll mention physically, this actually becomes a sexual thing for him through the course of the book. But now that you brought up my butterfly tattoo, it's interesting because my thought was, while I was reading this, as I got deeper into the book and kind of had what I thought was a clearer understanding of how Owen, how he operates, was that, for those of you that don't know, Rob has a booked tattoo on the inside of his arm. And I had a vision of Owen touching that tattoo, the tattoo starting to disappear from Rob's arm, and Owen being bored out of his fucking mind, reliving 303 book reviews.
Yeah, and countless. Oh, he'd have to remember editing the audio too.
Oh my God, the guy would throw himself off a building. That would be the shortest book ever. It would be. Hold on. Jonathan Maberry was writing this. It would be the shortest book ever. It would only be like 45 chapters.
Oh, that's exactly right. Yeah. So, but yeah, like he gets this weird, yeah, and so that his victimology becomes, he's looking for the most damage or damaging or damaged people, that the tattoos, he can draw as much out of those as possible, the most sadistic stuff possible, which is pretty dark. That's some dark stuff.
Yeah, as a like I said, as an ability, I found it to be somewhat unique. I'm not familiar of any other stories, at least that I've read, that deal with this type of monster, or this type of ability. But yeah, I mean, this book, how do I say this? This book on its surface is a little more enjoyable kind of horror monster book, right? But when it goes dark, it goes super fucking dark. I mean, this is there's some pretty fucked up shit that goes on in this book, and I wasn't expecting that from this type of book. So kudos to Maberry.
Yeah. Also, a little bit of a warning for anybody who's like got a little bit of a softer temperament. Like, there's some like really gruesome but just like depraved things that are described, so that's something to keep in mind.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. Covering a couple of the other characters, and this is where like I said, I feel the people who were fans of the Pine Deep trilogy will really get something out of this. So I know for a fact, because they're both named, and just from the way the story is written. But Malcolm Crowe, who is the chief of police, he's been in town for a while, and probably as the chief of police is my guess, from back when the Trouble happened. And so is Mike Sweeney, who is now, I don't know, I'm assuming this transpired back in the original trilogy, is now kind of like the adopted son of Malcolm. and also a police officer in the town. There are allusions to the fact that Diana was around during that too. So I feel that most of these characters that we meet in Pine Deep were part of the original trilogy. But what's changed in Pine Deep, seems to have changed in Pine Deep, is that it picked up, and this I think we should talk about, it picked up its own boundary street, which was an interesting concept back in Glimpse, but almost becomes more interesting when you start thinking about the fact that boundary streets, and it's mentioned that they appear kind of throughout the U.S., but I don't know how to explain it. Like I kept picturing like it's when Portland moves to your town. You think is that a fair assessment?
Just like a well, they even said the fringe, right? Like it's a fringe
Yep.
element to a town. Like, yeah, it would be the hippies and the freaks and the artists and the hipsters and stuff like that. Yeah.
Yep. But the other interesting thing is, I feel like Boundary Street, at least in Mayberry's world, will also indicate where you find the supernatural.
Yes. I picked up on that too, or at least like it had some sort of like supernatural association. Like it would maybe be like, we are more likely to like for some like to like for things to manifest, like that kind of a thing. Like it attracts the supernatural or amplifies it or something like that.
Yeah, which is really an interesting concept. I kind of like that, and I almost feel, and I'm not familiar with his entire catalog, but I wouldn't be surprised if that comes up again in future supernatural books, or if it has already come up in previous ones that he's written. And it's an interesting concept to be able to carry over from book to book, which then puts your readers in the know. If you mention a boundary street, that's it. Like, that's where shit's going to go down.
Yeah. So yeah, it's an interesting. I know we got off the plot a little bit, but it is an interesting like shared universe mechanic, where like it's shorthand for a whole thing, and that yeah, I got the feeling that it wasn't just Glimpse in this book that had it, but if it is, it's definitely something that he will use in subsequent books for sure. I think I'm going to dip back into the actual story a little bit because we're close to kind of hitting the point where the momentum starts up. So Livius kind of left off with Monk finds Patty and she's in absolute terrible shape, having gone on a bender. And one of the things that she did was when she noticed the tattoo of her daughter fading, she drunkenly started tattooing on it. Ostensibly to save it from fading away, but she was drunk and probably not in the best form for tattooing, and so it was really crude and awful. And then she, I think, angrily turned it into a smiley face, is basically what we're supposed to get out of that. And so she's in terrible shape from being drunk and like breaking glass and rolling around in it and tattooing herself while drunk. When he shows up, but she's also obviously in terrible shape emotionally because of the losing, like the thing that happened with the tattoo and losing like the memories of her daughter. So Monk takes her to the hospital, and that's when the police get involved directly with Patty and Monk. Mike Sweeney's at the hospital and they're like, hey, this guy brought in this girl. She looks beat up. So obviously they think Monk's the one who beat her up. And so there's all this suspicion. But that's what brings these characters together. And that's the Monk. That's the protagonist side of, hey, there's something going on here. We need to figure out what it is and stop it. And then the other part of it is Diana meets another character named Gail Kaczynski, who ends up being one of the more common characters throughout the book in a gay bar. And Gail is married to a man, but feels that wants to explore her bisexuality. Her husband's not into it. So she kind of like, but they're in a crappy marriage and everything. So she goes out one night just to see what a lesbian bar would be like and ends up hooking up with Diana, but then Diana forgets it. And so she's got this persistent like loss of memory that's happening and it's freaking her out. And that's her part of the escalation of something weird's going on. My tattoo's fading. I'm losing time. and we need to figure out what the hell's going on.
Yeah, I think for specific plot stuff, that's probably it's probably a good place to let off. What I do want to say is that we see the impact that Owen has on other people in through interludes, as Rob mentioned, which most of them deal with Owen's history, with the exception of one, I believe. And that's where I think, although Patty's story is very touching, as is Diana's. I mean, some of the other characters and the way they're impacted, these little kind of side stories that happen, to me, were almost more powerful than the main narrative on losing memories. I think that he did a really good job of taking little vignettes and kind of explaining to us how memories and even the bad things that happen to us make us who we are, and how you can lose your sense of identity if you lose sight of the bad stuff that you went through. And I found that to be one of the most endearing things in the book.
Yeah, I was trying to look up I won't go into what this character's involvement in the book is, but the girl who lost her boyfriend in the hunting accident.
Yep.
And that was actually beautifully written. I can't remember the name of the character. Her name starts with an A, but without going into what she does in the book, her setup is that she met this boy while they were in school, and they really were into each other, and eventually lost their virginity to each other, and it was very sweet and touching, and they were just so in love and all this stuff. And then he was shot and killed in a hunting accident. Basically, a hunter was irresponsible about the type of gun they use, and the bullet went astray and hit him and killed him. And so she was devastated, and that's the setup for what becomes probably one of the more twisted elements of the book. But it doesn't have really a huge impact. But it was such a good kind of side story, like you were saying. It could have been easily an amazing short story that had nothing to do with the book. But I think the inclusion of it and the way he wove that character into the overall story was really good.
For sure. The rest of the book is our band of 6 or so protagonists trying to piece everything together, figure out what's going on, find the culprit, and deal with him. So that's I think that about sums up the plot of this book.
I will say that in the interludes that deal with the bad guy Owen Minor, he does a good job of establishing not only the backstory of the character and what made him kind of the shitty person that he is, but also, which I did not expect, he included the whole concept of discovering you have a weird ability and trying to figure out how it works. So I think that it was nice that he included that kind of trial and error or figuring out what's going on part into the story of the bad guy. I think it fleshed him out nicely.
I agree. Yeah. I didn't give that much thought, but listening to you talk about it, in retrospect, I do have to agree that I think that was also pretty well done.
Yeah. Yeah.
What else to say about this book? The pace is fast. I mentioned this before, and when you're talking about, and I'm not going to do the math, but it's 2.5 page chapters on average. It's hard to keep that slow. That's typically an indicator that a book is going to move very, very quickly. It's funny that you brought up Zoo, because that is what I was thinking about when I was reading these really, really short chapters.
Yeah,
and thinking about what a breakneck pace Zoo had, and then this is Zoo on steroids. So yeah, it moves very, very quickly.
Yeah, and I think probably we're going to do a little spoiler talk. I hadn't really prepared thoughts on spoiler talk, but I think that there's probably enough stuff that we want to make sure we're on the same page about, that there's going to be at least a little bit of a spoiler discussion going on.
There is, and we're going to go do that right now. For those of you who are not familiar, spoiler talk is something that happens for most books we've been doing, at least for the last couple of years. That happens over at our Patreon, which is patreon.com/booked. We go over there and we talk about all the things we can't talk about here, the ending of the book, any really spoilery stuff. Oddly, sometimes that's where the complaints come out easiest about books, because it's really hard sometimes if there's something super spoilery that you didn't like to a tactful way to do that without ruining the book for anybody. So we're going to do that now. That's available to our Patreon patrons who subscribe at the $2 level or more per month. And you can be one of those. Super quick and easy. Go to patreon.com/booked and join at the $2 a month level.
All right, we are back from spoiler talk. And, you know, we always say the whole, like, oh, it was a great talk. It really made me think differently about the book. And it did. And I feel like it's going to come out in the wrap-ups we do in a second. But I want to give a little personal testimonial. We do these spoiler talks. We've been doing them for several years now. And it's always kind of an interesting proposition because we do it separately so that we don't spoil a book that someone hasn't read. But we understand that sometimes people have read the book, and that's why talking about spoilers is cool. And now I have like a first-hand experience to talk about. So this person that I work with was reading The Woman in the Window, I believe that's the name of it, right?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
A.J. Finn book we read, a year and a half ago. And I said, oh yeah, I reviewed it on my podcast. And then I kind of it reminded me of, I think there was a scandal about AJ Finn pretending to have cancer and not having it or something. So we had a nice little back and forth conversation. And I was like, hey, I'll be interested in hearing what you thought of it when you're done. Cause I think we came out kind of at least middle to, you know, a little bit on the positive side about the book.
I believe so.
So she read it and she says, "Oh, I listened to your review. I'd be interested to hear the spoiler talk." And I didn't want to make her go through all the rigmarole, so I was like, "Here, I'll just send you the file." Sent her the file. Livius is like, "You just cost us $2."
Yeah, Jesus Christ, pony up, lady.
And so then I got a response back of like all the things that she agreed with, all the things that we saw coming that she didn't see coming. And so that was the first kind of like direct feedback I got about spoiler talk. And then that made me realize that spoiler talk is way more useful than just kind of a fun, condensed way of talking about all the spoilers. Like it's a way to share an opinion with someone who's read the book. So, she really enjoyed it, and it was cool for her to see what other people thought about a book she read. So, in addition to just hearing more of us thinking what we think about a book, if you've read the book, it helps to like solidify, you know, it's like having a conversation with us since you can't have a conversation with us.
I have some thoughts on that, but first I want to say that if this was like a highly produced podcast, this would be where you would hear the "I want my $2" from the Better Off Dead movie.
Wow.
Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
That kid?
Yeah.
Chase him down the street, "I want my $2." That's what you would be hearing here right now. Yeah, I mean, we've known for a long time that it informs decisions we make on how we feel about the book. And it's always an odd one, man, because I read a lot of books solo for many, many years, hundreds and hundreds of books, and never had anyone to talk about them with. So I think everybody benefits, and it's not for all books, right? But for a lot of books, I think people benefit if they have someone to listen to. Like in this case, maybe you're just listening, but if you have someone to talk to, I mean, find a book buddy. I think that it really expands the experience of reading a book when you can share some of your thoughts about it with someone else that's also read the same book. Absolutely.
And that actually brings to mind a message that we got from one of our patrons recently named Janelle within the last couple of months. And she sent this really sweet, like it was the kind of message that when you receive it, you're like, well, that's my day made, because it was just so thoughtful and nice and complimentary. But she essentially said that, and I'm not saying we're the inspiration for this, but she has started a Zoom format book club with a few friends, and you know, it's just awesome to hear that, because what Livius is saying about talking to someone about a book that you've read changes that book for you than if you just read it for yourself. And so, like, first of all, congratulations, Janelle and friends, for starting a book club. I think that's amazing, because discussion of a book absolutely enriches the experience of a book. So I just wanted to point out, like, that is out there, and even if it's just you and a couple of friends who decide to read the same book and chat for an hour on video for like once a month or something, you're going to get so much more out of the experience of reading that book.
I am 100% in support of everything you just said, which is not really doesn't happen all that frequently.
Yeah.
Yeah.
People should do that more.
All right. So, but if you don't want to do that, patreon.com/book, $2 a month, you can just hear us spoil books for you. The other thing we didn't mention, I do think that some people who don't want to read a book, it's also a good place for them to go and hear what made or broke a book for us.
Yeah. Yeah. If it's a book where you're like, yeah, I don't really ever plan on reading this, so I just kind of want to know like the nitty gritty, that's a good way to get the whole story.
All right, back to this book. Rob's right, though. We did have a good conversation, and he put some things into perspective for me, and I think I may have done the same for him. But at this point, I think I'm just going to kick it to Rob to wrap this book up.
So I think that if anything in this conversation about this book sounded like it was a criticism or negative, it's very incidental. Like, we've reviewed over 300 books for the podcast now, and so when we're looking at a book, me and Livius will say stuff like, did you notice the typo? And the other one will say yes. And like, if there's one typo in a book, that's probably great for most authors, unless you're on like a super, super big publisher. But that's how focused our lens is. We have better than 20/20 vision than when it comes to like reading a story, because we just read and talk about so many stories. So like, sometimes we sound a little bit like we're saying negative things, and it's probably, like, in the case of this book, very incidental. I enjoyed the hell out of this book. I thought it was very entertaining. While I think that it would have been cool to know the backstory of the Pine Deep trilogy, it didn't make this book any less entertaining or enjoyable. I like the characters. I liked how character story focused the book was. A lot of crazy supernatural stuff and weird stuff and sometimes really gory and disturbing stuff happened. But, when it came down to it, it really was telling the story of how we treasure the good and bad things that happen to us. And in the case of this story, it was in the form of the tattoos that we make to remember things or to symbolize the things about ourselves. And so, all weird, supernatural, crazy stuff aside, that was really always the focus of the story. But just in a really crazy setting with a lot of funky, weird stuff going on. And I really enjoyed it. I think the strong points of this book were absolutely, the conclusion, for reasons that I'm not going to talk about, but we go to great length in spoiler talk to talk about. The conclusion was very well done, and it tied together a bunch of like disparate plot points very well. I liked the characters. I think it was a well charactered book, and the plot in general, because it was so focused on the idea of like the horror of losing our memories or losing ourselves, regardless of the mechanic that makes it happen, was very strong. Overall, I gave this 8 out of 10.
All right. I probably want to touch on a little bit on some of the stuff that you said. I don't know how much more enjoyable a book this would have been had I read the Pine Deep trilogy. I imagine I would have found it somewhat more enjoyable. My issue really is with the very specific standalone billing. I think there's maybe a better, and I'm not holding this against the book, but I definitely think like take a trip back to Pine Deep or something might have been a better way to approach. I don't know that that's exactly how I would go about it if it was me. So I do think that Pine Deep figures so prominently in this, and the trouble specifically in Pine Deep, that it probably hurts the experience for you if you know it or not, as a first-time reader. At least I feel it did for me. And again, I'm not holding it against the book. It's more of the marketing of the book that I take issue with. I agree in a lot of the same areas though that Rob did. I actually, Rob and I diverged pretty seriously at one point in our scoring system, which causes a disparity between the two numbers. So I thought the conclusion was very well done. I liked the characters by and large. I thought there were some really interesting things going on with the Owen Minor character, and I really, really loved the kind of exploration of memories and them making us who we are, and the effect that it can have when those memories are taken away from us. It's all the good stuff. I had one major sticking point with the plot, and I can't go into it here. I'm not going to. It's over in Spoiler Talk. That's not a way to get you to go listen to Spoiler Talk, but Rob and I talked about it for longer. Rob entertained me for longer than he probably should in listening to my gripes about this. But I did have to. I dinged that in plot. So I went back and just played with the numbers a little bit. I would have been really close to Rob with an 8. But overall, I liked everything. This one point was really a sticking point with me, and that brought my score down to a 7.25 out of 10. And that's going to take the average for the whole book to a 7.625 for anybody who's keeping track.
I would say that that's going on the paperback for this book, but it released in paperback to start with, so I don't think it's
That's
getting
true.
another
a
second release.
Yeah. Well, you never know. If there's enough demand for it, they'll figure out a way to get $25 out of someone for a hardcover.
Yeah. There you go. All right. I do want to point out that I'm going to take the hit for this. Usually we're pretty good about recognizing and advertising our milestones. And I dropped the ball because I hadn't been updating our Goodreads in a while. But when I did, I realized we have topped. This is our 303rd review on the podcast. So we missed celebrating our 300th milestone. But still, pretty cool.
Rob, I might have a thing here. Maybe work out the math for me. I believe I reviewed 2 books without you, and you reviewed 1 book without me. So isn't this really our collectively 300th book review?
That's exactly right. Yeah.
Beautiful. Congratulations, sir. What a milestone.
Look at you. That was some slippery maneuvering there. I liked it.
God, it was. Rob told me this earlier before we started the podcast, and I was stunned. I would, if you would have said, "Hey, how many books have you guys reviewed?" I probably would have said, "I don't know, 215 maybe." So it being over 300 means it's about time for Rob to buy another bookshelf, I guess.
Oh yeah,
that's what that means. Yeah,
I spent so much time giving myself more bookshelf space, and now I'm like half of them are doubled up. Like I still need like a significant amount more bookshelves.
Rob moved into a bigger place because he couldn't keep all of the books that we reviewed. Just in case anybody's a newer listener, Rob's goal is to have a physical copy of every book we've reviewed, of which there is a physical copy. There are some ebook onlys and some odd things and some out of print thing. You know what I mean? So it's not realistic to do all of them, but he has, I'm going to guess 290 maybe at this point.
It's close to that. Yeah. I know I have over 90% of all the books that are print. Yeah.
And on top of that, there are some that he has multiple editions of because he had a copy, but then he decided he wanted them to be first editions if you can get them, or hardcovers or whatever. So there are literally hundreds of books that Rob was housing in a studio apartment, and he moved into a bigger apartment. And I like to think it's just so that we can review another 150 or 200 books.
That's well, no, I might have to get a 2-bedroom for that and just give the books a room.
Give them both rooms. Sleep on the couch.
It might. I have a nice couch now, so that
there you go.
It's not out of the question.
All right. Anything been on your radar? You've been watching anything of interest, or?
I should have something prepared for this because it's been weeks. I started rewatching the show Mindhunter, mostly because we talked to Mark Olshaker and it was very interesting. And he seemed like he was very enthusiastic about it. So I was like, I'm going to watch that again because it's a really great show. So I'm rewatching that right now. Man, I'm drawing a blank. What about you?
Nothing of any interest. I'm making my way through the newest season of The Crown on Netflix, which is okay. I haven't been watching much of anything. I mean, like all the fall shows have come back, so there's kind of background noise with shows I've been watching for years, but nothing that I'm super excited about.
So The Crown, I heard that Gillian Anderson as Margaret Thatcher is a pretty intense character.
Is horrifying, is what it is. 'Cause she's like a crotchety old British woman, and look, all I can say is this: if you got a little tingle when you see her in the X-Files, this will kill the tingle if you see her in The Crown.
Well,
Like I'm sure she's doing a great and accurate job. I don't know enough about Margaret Thatcher, but I'm assuming based on things that I've seen that they tend to be very realistic and whatever. Margaret Thatcher was not the kind of woman you wanted to spend a lot of time like listening to or get the presence of, at least the way she's portrayed in this show. So yeah, if you've got the hots for Gillian Anderson, strongly recommend you do not watch this.
well, speaking of X-Files, something did come to mind. Did you know that there's a sequel to the movie The Craft called The Craft Legacy?
I assume that's what it was that popped up somewhere I saw it and I was like, oh my god, they made a sequel to The Craft.
I watched it.
Oh, okay.
And so yeah, it's I think it's written by the same person. I might be wrong about that. There's some sort of, I'm just going to go to IMDb now because I don't want to sound like an idiot. Or I may already sound like an idiot. But anyway, I watched it. I enjoyed it. I thought it was cool enough. Oh no, it's totally different people who wrote and directed it. But it's different enough. It's a very modern take on witches. But the reason I mentioned X-Files is our best friend David Duchovny is a main character. He's like one of the main male characters in the movie.
Oh, well, in that case, I'm gonna have to tune in to what's it called? The Craft.
The Craft Legacy.
I guess this isn't new or whatever, but I did decide that I should probably see all the James Bond movies.
Oh yeah.
So I'm two in. I have watched Doctor No and From Russia with Love. So I'm trying to like get one in every weekend, basically. So I don't know. Probably by 2028, I'll be all caught up with James Bond movies. Like I've seen, especially all of the early ones as a kid. I mean, I wanted to grow up and be James Bond. But I haven't seen them as an adult, and I haven't watched like any of like the newer ones, like the last 4 or whatever that I've heard very good things about. So I'm trying to. I think it's something like 22 movies or something ridiculous like that. So I have been watching those, and it can be a little tough watching a movie that was made, 60 years ago. I think Dr. No was 1962.
Dude, you just gave me an interesting idea, because you know that the Ian Fleming books exist.
Mm-hmm.
And
I know.
I've never read any of the James Bond books.
Oh, you know what? This might, without going in too much on the podcast, this might kind of fit in a little bit into what we were talking about earlier.
Yeah. Something to think about.
I don't remember. I think it's Casino Royale is the first James Bond book.
Yep. Yeah, I'm on the Wikipedia right now.
Okay. Casino
Royale came out April 13th, 1953, so it's like 3 years older than my mom.
That's definitely something we might have to do. Rob and I were toying with some ideas of how we want to kick off the new year, and maybe doing something a little different than we normally. Still reviewing books, but maybe finding some kind of I don't know, path that we can go down with some older books or something. So we'll see. But I do know what the next 2 books are. And Rob, would you like to know what the next 2 books are? You already know.
That's unless they're different than the 2 we discussed before the podcast.
Yeah, that's so next week I have convinced Rob. Now this came to me via the fact that I listened to a couple of audiobooks that were written by a gentleman named Frederick Bachman. I guess if you keep up with like the New York Times bestseller list better than 2 guys who review books for their podcast, that might sound familiar. I believe a number of his books have been at the top of the New York Times bestseller list. He had a new one come out in September that's been on my radar, and I convinced Rob to read it. It'll be my first time reading one of his books. I've listened to 2 of them as audiobooks and really, really, really enjoyed them. And then the following week, we're going to go back to the Les Edgerton well with his new book, Hard Times. I can't promise, but I get the feeling that we might have Les on to talk about that at some point in December. So I think that's going to be 2 or 3 of the episodes you're going to be hearing from us here shortly.
Yeah, it's exciting. Back in the book reading saddle, it's been it's been a little thin lately. So hopefully this momentum will carry through for a little while.
It has to. I'm not going to say why, but Rob and I have another milestone we want to hit here shortly. So we're gonna, by hook or by crook, we'll let you know when we hit it. Unlike the 300 book milestone.
Yeah, which totally. Let's just pretend that there's some clever reason. We'll use Livius's. It's the 300th book we reviewed together. That was the idea all along. We just wanted to make it sound dramatic.
Dude, how many people do you think have read 300 books with somebody else?
That's probably Jesus. Now that you say that,
I mean, how many people do you think have read 300 of the same books with someone else? And I mean, I guess that's probably. Yeah. I mean, let's say you're a big horror guy, right? Stephen King's got to have 50, and then if you've read all the Dean Koontz, so there's probably some crossover. But like with someone how many people do you think have co-read 300 books?
It's got to be a staggeringly small number.
Yeah, and there's all the books that we both read prior to the podcast.
Yeah,
because that's what started the podcast. So yeah, it's an interesting thought.
Our Venn diagram of books read is probably the most overlappy out there.
I would have to agree, but we're gonna keep at it. We'll see. Next milestone coming up, 400 books. That'll probably be 2023.
I was going to say, right? That's going to take a little bit.
Yeah. So, at any rate, glad to be back with you guys. Although I enjoyed my break, I was very happy to read a book. Very happy to jump into another book. Maybe even tonight. And thanks for listening, I guess.
All right. Join us next time for some Anxious People. And that's not you, listeners. That's the name of the book. Until then, I'm Rob Olson.
And I'm Livia Snedden. Keep reading.